Hi everyone, good morning. I assume, is it okay if we get started? Or should we wait a few more minutes? Does everybody know? Okay. So, thank you very much for coming to the session. This is workshop 8, and the title is Fending Off the Trolls, Journalists in Defense of Democracy. My name is Michael Ogia, and I'm the Advocacy and Engagement Manager with the Global Forum for Media Development. I am also one of the co-focal points for the session, along with Nadia Tiaha. And basically what I'm going to do is I really just want to keep my talking as limited as possible, and then I'll hand it over to our moderator and to our panelists, or rather to our key participants. This is very much a roundtable type of discussion, which is why we moved down from the stage over to here. And so at any point, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand throughout the session, and please feel free to contribute as much as possible. So just as an overview, this is very much a session about the threats to our information ecosystem, and specifically how journalists and news media organizations can strengthen it. Just as some remarks I've prepared, just essentially around the world, but especially in Europe, democracy is facing new challenges, many of which are exacerbated by new technologies. For instance, the 2019 Freedom in the World report, published by Freedom House, found that 2018 was the 13th consecutive year of deteriorating freedoms around the globe, while the same organization's Freedom of the Net report from 2018 stressed that the internet is growing less free around the world, and democracy itself is withering under its influence. In fact, the free internet that we have known is now under a two-front attack. On the one hand, digital authoritarianism is rising, which is compounded by the fact that press freedom, intrinsic to ensuring societies are accountable, transparent, and informed, continues to decline globally. On the other hand, market dynamics, including consolidation, dominant market positions, and new challenges to the digital economy have become ubiquitous. As a result, the business models of large internet platforms have enabled and encouraged, among other things, disinformation that sells better than real investigative reporting, as well as hate speech and the operations that influence politics and elections across frontiers. As a workshop that feeds into workshop 12, which will be held in the afternoon, as well as plenary 7, which will be focusing on online harms, also in the afternoon. This workshop will focus on the broader phenomenon, as well as the damages that automated systems such as algorithms, trolls, bots, etc., can provoke within the public debate in digital societies through social media, and how this can be addressed by journalists, news media, and institutions that basically are working in a common effort to make the public debate healthier and less susceptible to disinformation and misinformation. This is especially relevant in time of elections, which are a crucial moment when citizens need fact-based, high-quality information to make informed decisions. And it will also highlight the role of the media in strengthening democracy and how information and communications technologies both help and oftentimes harm that goal. This session will also seek to highlight how other interferences in democracy, such as cyber attacks against journalists and the very sustainability of journalism and news media, threatens public access to high-quality information. And how these can be kind of addressed and tackled and better pursued in order to protect the integrity of journalistic work and, by virtue, the integrity of democracy itself. Last but not least, the workshop will also bring other examples of what news media, journalism support, and media development organizations specifically are doing to reduce these risks. So, apologies if that was a bit longer-winded than you might have anticipated. But with that said, it's really my honor to introduce our moderator for today's event. I have the honor to introduce Mr. Leon Williams, who is the director of the Amsterdam-based organization Free Press Unlimited. So unless you want to say a few more words about yourself, I will hand the floor to you.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm Leon. Hi, everybody. We're still in the morning, so we're thinking about having a very intelligent and awake audience still. let me introduce the panelists we have so that we can get some, expert insights about what is happening in terms of journalism, disinformation during the recent elections, and then we take it from there. Silvia Mascagna, he is the cabinet member of Commissioner Julian King in the European Union. We have Malgorzata Peck. She is the project officer on media and internet for the Council of Europe, a very important institution. Max Sengis works for Google. He's working on internet governance and research and development. And we have my good friend Vitaly Moros from Internews. He works in Ukraine. Now, just as a kind of a warm-up, by the way, we're good friends because Internews and Free Press Unlimited work together on many projects where we try to foster quality, fact-based journalism, and we do that also in Eastern Europe. Just by warming up, just after coffee, to get the audience view, who of you thinks that journalists have a role in disinformation? Can I see hands? Who of you does not think journalists have a role in disinformation? Oh, that's more scary, apparently. Who of you think that journalists are the cause of disinformation, are causing disinformation? Yeah, good. That is what I was looking for. Because we need some discursive views here, just to make it not so easy for us. Can you tell me who you are and why you think journalists are the problem?
Hello everyone, I'm Antonio from Italy. At least from where I come in Italy now, there is, but I think not only in Italy, there's this run for information, and I mean like with clickbait titles, so it seems like the speed of information is more important than the quality of the information. So most of the time articles are not so deeply in the truth, but like just to be fast and not to be quality.
So thank you very much. When all of you seem to say that journalism has a role in disinformation, we have to look also at the issue of quality. And that is a problematic issue because quality is not a category that is legally minted. But let's now go to our panel. Silvio, we had elections recently for the European Parliament. I think that elections are the highlight of disinformation efforts. Can you give us an overview of what happened during the recent elections in terms of disinformation from your perspective? Michael, yeah.
First of all, good morning, and I would like to thank the organizer for this kind of invitation, the possibility to contribute to this very timely debate, because as you say, the election for the European Parliament were end up just 3 weeks ago or something like that. So I think it's very timing to have this discussion. I would like maybe to start with a positive note. And I would like to refer to the participation rate to the European Parliament election that was around slightly more than 50%, but let's say 50%. That was the highest participation rate in the last 20 years. So as a matter of curiosity, I found out the participation rate for the previous 3 elections. So it was 42% in 2014. 2009 was the same, more or less, 42, and 45 in 2004. So there was an increase of 8%. If you look at this at a European level, it's a quite significant increase, and I think it's also a clear sign that citizens care about democracy and about the future of the European Union. Now, coming back to the core of this debate, or one of the core aspects of this debate. You probably know that, and if you don't know, you know now, that we came out last year with a first preliminary assessment. So the Commission, jointly with the European External Action Service, published a report. It's not a conclusive report, it's indeed the first preliminary assessment, because there are two aspects here. First of all, we noticed that this information is evolving very quickly. I mean, the disinformation modus operandi, the disinformation tactics are evolving very quickly, are much more sophisticated, much more difficult to attribute. And then, I'm happy that we have with us today a representative from Google. I think indeed that the social platform, they need to do a bit more or much more to give access to independent researchers to the data. So what I will try to illustrate today is really the result of a first preliminary assessment. So the question is, can we say indeed that the European Parliament elections were free from disinformation? The answer is no. Probably we have not seen, I would say, high-profile leaks as in previous election. It comes to my mind what happened during the last French presidential election, what happened to President Macron, the leaks. We have not seen something like that. But for sure, it's fair to say that the last European Parliament election were not free from disinformation. The Strategic Communication Task Force, that is a department, I'm sorry to use always this long name, but basically is a department in the External Action Service that was set up in 2015 to detect and to analyze this information. For instance, disinformation cases that we can attribute to Russian sources, since January 2019, we have detected around 1,000 cases. And if you look at the figures in the same period of the previous year, 2018, these figures have doubled. So 1,000 since January 2019, around 450 since January 2018 for the same period, so the first 4 months ahead of the European Parliament election. It's a different kind of disinformation. We see that more and more they pick up real local facts. Sometimes they use a lot these bots and these fake accounts. Sometimes there are this army of sleeping bots that are activated when you want to amplify the message, the narrative. So we are confronted with these evolving tactics, and just to give you some very concrete example, there was this information about the fact that, for instance, Poland is poorer now than under the communist regime, or there was this information that President Macron wants to expel some member states from the European Union. Just to give you a couple of examples. So I understand I have still 1 minute? Well, so, but can I take one more?
Yeah,
yes.
Go ahead.
Because in any case, I would like to briefly explain what we have been doing to counter disinformation. So basically, we have taken very seriously this problem since a long while now, and we have been working on 4 different pillars, if I can call this in a very synthetic way. So the first one is to get much better to detect and to analyze this information. I referred before to this department in the External Action Service, and we have set up a rapid alert system in order to be better prepared to respond to this information. And this is a platform, a shared platform between the European Union and member states. So member states, all member states, they have appointed contact points which are part of this rapid alert system. Then the important cooperation with the platforms. We have, I would say, we have pushed the platform, the most important platforms, so Google, Twitter, Facebook. Recently, Microsoft has joined this club to sign on the code of practice. So it's a voluntary approach, and I would like to draw some lessons because we have been monitoring your progress on a monthly basis. You were submitting report on a monthly basis since the beginning of the year. I think we have seen some real progress on paid political advertising. That for sure. All the three platforms have set up their own scrutiny criteria. They have set up libraries that will be very useful now to understand how much money has been spent for paid political advertising, who is behind political advertising. Probably there is something more to do because we have seen also that some information in the libraries were not really accurate. For instance, some Italian engineers were put there as political advertising, while the EFD in German was not included. So there is some work. We think there is some work to do. What do we think? Two aspects, and I finish. That there is still room to improve. Are not indeed the paid political advertising, but issues advertising. This is a much more gray area, if I can qualify in this way, because we have seen that advertising page that maybe are set up for a completely different purpose, then are slowly transformed in something that can be used as a way to spread this information. You have been working hard on that because a huge number of pages have been cancelled or deleted ahead of the European election. We need, and I finish really, 2 points more. We need that the platform, they are doing that, but they expand even more the cooperation with fact-checker networks. And last but not least, as I mentioned, we need that. Of course, there is the issue of the data privacy, the data protection. But we would like really that you give a better access to independent researchers and fact-checkers, because this is very important.
Yeah. Without making this a discussion about platforms, it is clear that you have a couple of points that Max can address a bit later. Maybe one of the most interesting elections recently was the election in Ukraine for the presidency, and we're very happy to have Vitaly Moros here from Internews Ukraine, head of digital there. Can you tell us, in terms of someone who's dedicated to quality information as a mission, what happened in Ukraine from your perspective, and what kind of specific examples can you give of bad information that had an influence?
Thank you. Yes, it is a problem. Quality information and the work of journalism in Ukraine is under the threat today. I'll focus in my short speech on two main aspects. First of all, we'll talk. Ukraine has been always a testing ground for disinformation. So what does it mean for European Union? If something happening in Ukraine, it might be replicated later in the countries of European Union. Secondly, I'll focus on last elections in Ukraine, and we'll focus on the rise of populism and the role of technology in the rise of this populism. So Ukraine lives in the state of information disorder during the last 5 years. Since 2014, with annexation of Crimea by Russia and ongoing war in Donbass. But nevertheless, Ukraine still makes progress in reforms. It's building more close ties with European Union. And despite all of disinformation campaigns, it still makes progress. Ukraine has been always under the eye of Russia, and the key approach by Russian government regarding Ukraine, because this country wants to move back Ukraine to the area of its influence. So the main narrative from Russia within their disinformation campaign is that Ukraine is a failed state, that institutions doesn't work, that Ukraine are Nazi, that Ukraine government is illegal. They used to call previous government as illegal, even though we had democratic elections in 2014. And Russia will definitely emphasize the use of technologies and proxy media. The proxy media is the media which might be funded by Russian government, but they might register in Ukraine as officially legitimate media in Ukraine, and they promote the ideas of these narratives, Russian narratives, through different channels. On the eve of elections, my organization, Internews Ukraine, made some research. This research based on analysis of big data, and more organizations in Ukraine trying to analyze big data because we have millions of accounts in different social media networks. But we focused on Russian social network Vkontakte. It is second largest social network in Ukraine. 2 years ago, Ukrainian government made decisions to block Russian social networks in Ukraine, and it was imperfect decisions because on the one hand there were violations of digital rights of users. On the other hand, there was a strategic decision how to move from the influence of Russian Federation. So we analyzed on the eve of elections 1 million profiles of Vkontakte and 10 millions of posts from Vkontakte. What were the main conclusion? That Russian wall, the concept of Russian world is flourishing in the social media networks, and there was key three lessons learned. First of all, there was negative rhetoric against all candidates on the presidential elections. Some candidates had more positive coverage, like pro-Russian candidates, but still the negative trend was dominant. Secondly, Ukraine was portrayed compared to Russia as a failed state in tens more times than Russia. And the third, that the social network have a lot of anti-Semitism and hate speech which is flourishing. And it's very important comparing to Western social networks where they have community standards and they block the content which violates the rules. Russian social networks allow hate speech and anti-Semitism, and they don't, and there is probably no policy against it. We will be focused more and more on analyzing of Facebook, but from my perspective, hate speech is coming to Facebook as well, and probably the tech platform need to emphasize more to fight back. My second point about the role of populism as results of elections and the role of technology. You might know that Ukraine 2 months ago elected a new president. He is comedian with no background in politics. He wasn't like he wasn't a single day in the office. In 2 months, in a month we have parliamentary elections, and his political party is now been formed. And according to polls, this political party, which has never existed, will get at least 50% of votes in new parliament. It means that the president and the parliament will accumulate huge powers. But what was the main lessons? That the rules change, and rational debates, rational politics didn't appeal to voters today. The newly elected president, he used the tactics of virtual representation. He didn't meet the press. He didn't participate in debates, and he was pushed by civil society to participate at least one debate. And instead of going to the conference hall or the big event, he went to the stadium, and he had debates on the stadium, and it was rather show than rational debates. Also, the campaign of the newly elected president looked like he hired Hollywood-style studio because he was appealing to emotions, not rational behavior. His campaign in social media was based on attacking opponents and appealing to emotions of voters who were quite disappointed. It means that, at least in Ukraine, the populism enforced by social media, by technologies, play a significant role in outcomes of elections. Still, we have a democratic government, but this lesson of populism might be very important for European Union. Thank you.
Okay, so that is an interesting added element. Before we go into remedies, maybe we need another view on the scope of the problem. So Silvio said there's more disinformation, it's more intelligent, it is more quickly, it's moving, it has local appearance, and we need to better detect it and try to get something. Vitaly is saying one of the problems that we see actually is that the social media sphere seems to increase the ability for hate speech, which is very problematic in Ukraine. And we see the rise of populism that has spiraled, that actually steps away from traditional ways of running elections, away from rational debate. Now, Max, you've been working at Google, actually, I don't know, since when?
2009.
So 2009. So you've been there around. And in 2009, I guess it was super cool to be part of Google. But nowadays, certainly some politicians seem to think that Google is the boogeyman. In many of these documents. But I was actually reading this interesting report that was produced, which I encourage all of you to actually dig into. It's the joint communication to the European Parliament by the European Commission. And I was reading that you were taking out staggering numbers of videos from YouTube. So from your perspective, the elections, how did you go about it? What do you research? You have some questions that were asked by Silvio on what Google could do more or better in terms of transparency, in terms of focus. What is your perspective?
Thank you so much. And, you know, I can tell you it's still pretty cool to work at Google. I'm happy to chat with anybody who's interested. And very importantly, we had a quick discussion before, and while I'm happy to represent industry to the degree possible and platforms, I think there are enormous differences between the platforms. Because, frankly, it's very different purposes that they serve. And Google has always been participating in these internet governance multi-stakeholder fora, which I think have the distinct quality of being deliberative. We are here to talk about problems and to find solutions, and I'm here to share some of what we are doing, but also listen to what is being suggested. And as some of you might know, I'm also leading our research and development partnerships in this space, so I love to hear when you say you want more access to the data to understand the problem better, because that's exactly one of the constructive and viable ways that we can work closer together. I think the first important piece to mention from our perspective is that we have been in this together in the good times and now in the bad times as well. Right? If you think back 10 years ago, it was all about democratizing access to information, citizen journalism, and everybody, I guess, here in the room thought that YouTube is a great thing. And now we're seeing two things. We're seeing weaponized information, and we're seeing a lot of spam. And those are two very hard problems that we can solve together, but we cannot solve them by saying, oh, look, the big platforms are spoiling everything. We're not doing anything. It's user-generated content. It's app use of the platform. I think that's very important to say. Before I share some of the things that we are actually doing, I think in the spirit of proposing some other lines of thinking here. I think we also have to think about innovation in democracy. I'm just listening to a great new book by Larry Diamond, The Ill Winds, that tackles both the situation as well as some solutions. And ranked choice voting is a really interesting and viable, because it's not a revolutionary new idea. It's an evolution. It's an iteration from how we are voting today. And the second question that I would like to put on a very fundamental basis is whether journalism as the fourth power in the state should really be such a market and capitalist-driven environment as it is today. And coming from Germany, I can only say that even in the 5 years that we lived in the United States, we were watching Tagesschau every night, because the quality of the information, whether it's BBC or the German public broadcasters, is good. And maybe, that there's something to be learned about that. But let me come to the points of what we do and how we're working actually with a number of partners, because we can't do this alone, against especially the weaponization of information, but also spam. There's three areas. There's one about product, one about combating the malicious actors, and one supporting partners and others in that fight. On the product side, when it comes to elections in particular, we provide special sites and work with partners to allow people to very easily find the nearest voting location in search. We work with partners to allow the assistant to give good answers when you ask what are the European elections, things like that. We have custom topic experiences on Google News. We have dedicated pages on Google Trends. And of course, we're developing fact-checking tools, which I think is also a partner activity. I want to point out in particular the work of claim review under schema.org, which I think is the right approach, because it's not an individual actor's activity. It's actually an open standard where the community together verifies the facts on the ground. And we're training journalists and news site operators. I think there was 300 workshops this year alone through the First Draft initiative that we are supporting. There were 4,600 journalists trained this year through the Google News initiative. And as Silvio pointed out, for political ads, we have introduced verification of authorship. We have in-ad disclosures, so you can actually find out who did it, and we include that in the transparency report that we share with the EU and other relevant authorities. In terms of combating the malicious content, we have some numbers that even I found staggering. Just in 2008, there were 1.2 million pages removed from our ads index, so they're not allowed to place ads anymore. There were 22,000 apps removed from the Play Store, and there were 15,000 sites completely removed out of the Google index because of malicious or suspected malicious content. This is 2018, yeah. And then maybe a couple of words about YouTube, which I think is a particularly difficult environment, to be honest, but just to share the developments there. Originally, we estimated that we recommend new videos by how long the watch time is across the period that it is up. That is actually changed to a new indicator that is satisfaction, which means you don't, the videos that just run through are not the ones that get recommended. It's the ones that get likes, that get shared, and that actually get recommended through surveys that we do. Is that the best way to do it? If you have a normative point of view, if you want a more paternalistic Google that we influence what people see, yeah, then we have to agree on the norms on how to decide what good content is. So far, when you type something in at Google, then you get what most people think is the best answer. It's not our decision. It's not an editorial choice. And I think it's a very difficult question whether you want that editorial choice at Google or not. In terms of misinformation, we have introduced alert panels. So when we are suspicious that this is a conspiracy story, we highlight a message on top linking to a claimed source review that is debunking the myth as we see it. And we rank authoritative sources higher in the algorithm. If you want some more numbers on the YouTube removals, it was 8.8 million videos just in Q4 of 2018, 2.4 million channels removed in Q4 2018, and 260 million comments removed in just 3 months. So, I think what's very clear is the scale is of a magnitude that we have to find systemic solutions, and that you cannot expect an individual institution to take care of this.
Well, thanks very much. I mean, I thought it was important that you mention all those numbers, because indeed we're looking at information overload, and it's an enormous amount of stuff that needs to go on. Maybe it's time to move to solutions. I'd like to invite Giacomo Mazzoni from the European Broadcasting Union. He was in a short session somewhere else. Giacomo, Max actually said something which I found intriguing. Do we want journalism to be captured by the capitalist idea of the market? You represent public media from Europe, maybe an idea that isn't catching on in many parts of the rest of the world, so I'm not sure if that is a solution. But from your perspective, from the EBU, what are you trying to do in order to foster quality fact-based journalism, and how to look at the enormous problems that are described by the first three panelists?
Yeah, we are at EuroDIG, so I think that we need to focus on the European perspective that is more appropriate in the context. But if we bring this to a global analysis, probably the solution could be different. Of course, I think that having strong public service media in each country that are really independent from all those to which they need to be independent, means economic and financial powers and the governments, could be the benchmark for the quality journalism and for the reliable information. And that's something that we do all the time. But of course, the main problem that we have to face today is that the business model for all news outlets is definitely compromised. We are facing a desertification of news outlets in a lot of countries. For instance, local newspapers are disappearing because they cannot finance themselves anymore. And as a consequence, we have a pauperization of the journalist profession. I recommend my son to become a journalist, even if I've been a journalist for 35 years, because it's not a career where he can, today has the same possibility of being independent-minded as I was privileged in the public service. Today, even in Italy, the number of journalists leaving from this profession has shrunk by nearly the half. So this is a deep problem that we need to face. If you have very badly paid journalists with unsafe jobs that are paid by article or having contract for 3 months, how you can expect that they will be independent, that they will do investigative journalism, and that they will put against big giants or big corporations or even politicians? That's a very scary situation. Having said so, then I am always a little bit upset when we talk of fact-checking, because for me, after 25 years of journalism, fact-checking is exactly what I'm supposed to do since the very first day I started this work.
In advance.
But the problem is that fact-checking is a mantra that is used, in my opinion, to take away the responsibility from the platforms. Sorry to say that to Max, we have a friend, but on this he knows that I dissent radically. for instance, when he give all these numbers about what has been taken down, I'm worried. Who decides what is good to be taken down? On which base, on which editorial judgment? There is, for those of you that are not aware, BBC keeps a weekly account number of all the items of BBC that are not anymore reachable through the platforms from search engines that's been removed. Most of these items are concerning big tycoon companies, countries that are under authoritarian regime, because they have good lawyers that they go to some platforms and they said, this is something that you are not to make accessible because it's damaging our reputation. This is taken away. Nobody knows why. Nobody knows on which criteria. This is attending the right of information and the access to information of the public. Because if you do on a search engine looking for something that you cannot find, today means that it is not accessible to the citizen. So the problem is radically to rethink the relations between the platforms and the traditional media. I'm glad that there has been 300 seminars made last year about fact-checking, etc. I think that the problem is that there are traditional media. These traditional media have a role in society. They are reliable, and they need to have what was in the past prominence. We have in Europe, for instance, the must carry regulation for national broadcasting channels. I think that, and it's written in the new directive, or the Visual Media Directive reform, that this prominence need to be respected in the new internet world. It's not the single users that can do the fact-checking. There are hundreds of thousands of journalists paid for doing this, but they need to be accessible, they need to be visible, they need to have a priority over other things. Just to give you an anecdotic example, in Italy, 2 years ago, Agicom shut down a web service that was created in Naples by a very creative family. What they were doing? They were inventing totally fake news. For instance, he killed his wife, put in a bag and left to the train station. People look at it, click on it, and then they don't go nowhere, but they go on a page where there was simply collecting advertising. So this is a very brutal way to make it, but it means that the current system could be gained a lot, and the answer of the platform is, but we are user-generated contents, and then we can remove if there is something that is wrong. No, media, they have a responsibility, preemptive responsibility, and if we do something wrong, we go to jail, we can be persecuted, etc. While the platforms say, tell me and I will remove as soon as possible, or in certain cases in 10 hours, 12 hours. Like this will not work. We need to go on a different level, and we need to have a different interaction. Last point, I'm sorry, because I forgot. We have done some experience of fact-checking our members in certain countries during presidential election or legislative election has done fact-checking experience. This is a waste of time. If it's not played correctly by the platform, we waste our time because we were not knowing which are the news that were skyrocketing. So you probably debunk a news that nobody cares of. Even if you identify something that is scary or questionable, then nothing happens because there was this red dot. This news could be questionable. Doesn't work like that. You need more radical procedures that have been tested recently, like, for instance, sterilization of the likes for Facebook or quarantine certain pages, etc. But need to be made in a collaborative, transparent, fully transparent way. If not, it's a waste of time and we will not do anymore.
I think that what you're referring to is that fact-checked news is not visited by the same audience who's visiting the false news. Is that? If
you live in your bubble and you put a red dot on something saying this is a questionable news, then some people think that you are part of the plot that try to give them the fake reality representation.
Thank you. Malgorzata, you've been working for the Council of Europe. Now, the way I know the Council of Europe, it is one of our truly important legal institutions that we have to determine what is right or wrong to a certain extent. But you're a head of media and internet. So how do you, I mean, basically we see calls for regulation, we see enormous efforts to take down information that is harmful. What to make of it? Because in a sense, the whole problem of the election manipulation is that it's harming democracy. We see the examples from, well, is it harmful? I don't know. Is it bad that a comedian becomes, has the ability to become the president of Ukraine or not? I'm certainly not in a position to decide on that. A lot of outside interference, but also very important problematic issues. Who does what and who should do what? Now, why is the Council of Europe interested? Because actually one of the problems is that institutions are in and of itself also under attack by the public because they're less trusted. What do you make sense of this? What should we do?
There's a lot of very difficult questions, and the point is that there are not easy answers. These issues are very, very complex, and we have to balance different rights: right to privacy, right to freedom of expression, in order to have to try to identify the right solutions. So it's not always there is a tendency to look for easy, quick solutions, but it's not right attitude. We need to have more research and try to build what's called a favorable environment for media and for journalists to have a valuable, quality public debate. We believe that Council of Europe believes very much that quality journalism and quality media can be part of a solution how to respond to the spread of this and malinformation. So it can be part of the response how to address these challenging problems. And but in order to have this favorable environment for journalism, for quality journalism, and independent media, we need to focus on. We need to states, but also different media actors need to work together and engage more. There's a lot of work to be done. Different solutions can be found in order to reach this goal of creating favorable environment for journalism and for independent media. Definitely, part of these possible measures is providing independent quality media and ethical journalism with relevant financial opportunities. So basically to think how to respond to the market failure of many quality journals that right now struggle how to survive in the digital environment where every content is available free of charge on the internet, basically. The sale of tangible copies is dropping rapidly. So we need to be inventive in order to support this unique public good, which is independent journalism, independent quality media.
Would you frame independent quality media as a public good? Well, in terms of the perspective on the business model and what Max said, well, I actually watch the Tagesschau because it's publicly funded. I know it's independently verified, and I think it's quality. And why the hell should that be a market operation? Giacomo is saying there's so many journalists unemployed. We need those people to get back in the profession. But there seems to be a problem here. From your perspective, for example, Babiš in the Czech Republic has captured the private media, and the public broadcasting system actually is still a bastion of quality information. Whereas in what happened in Hungary is actually the public media that were captured by the political parties, and it is the RTL News that was one of the last, the commercial news that was one of the last, let's say, sanctuaries of quality journalism. So there seem to be, it is very difficult, and we're talking about European solutions, very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all approach. Then what do we do? Because where do we start?
So, yes, indeed, I can only agree there is no one solution that would fit every, even if within Europe landscape, but one solution that would fit every market, every legal culture, every media landscape. So we need to find right solutions for different countries. It's a lot depends on the local specificity. We identified as a part of the expert works that are conducted right now in the Council of Europe, possible solutions that can be suggested to the member states in order to to choose what is working for them. So one of these solutions is to consider fiscal measures in order to help media companies to survive in this difficult, new, challenging environment. Another element well known in European landscape is direct state support, public aid actually. So it functions as well for public service media. Maybe we need it also for the local media, community media. Support schemes for particular forms of journalism, like investigative journalism, for supporting given projects of investigative work. It's something to be also considered. But also redistribution mechanism. Online media platforms need to contribute to, in greater extent, to financing of production of the quality media content. So this is also a thing to be considered. But okay.
Sam, I think we need to get some perspectives from the audience. But before we do that, I want to give 1 minute to Silvio and 1 minute to Max. Because the problem here seems to be a real massive problem. Because actually all of you are saying we need systemic solutions. We need a different approach. We need to rethink the relationship between social media platforms and the traditional media. But from a European perspective, of course, media and information, the right to access of information is something that the member states of the European Union think is their turf. So what from the European Union perspective can you do? On the one hand, all of you are saying, just to put it very bluntly, we are here in the Netherlands, so that is allowed to be blunt, that the information ecosystem is probably the most important infrastructure we have in society at the moment. It's actually maybe as important as the agricultural infrastructure to feed people. But the European Union is doing stuff that is, like few grants for independent journalism or research journalism, there's not a real massive intervention to save quality information. What is limiting you, Silvio?
Yeah, in 1 minute it's not easy. Maybe I will take 2 minutes if you allow me. Let's start again with a positive note, because if we look at if we do an overall assessment, the resilience of the European Parliament election to disinformation, from a democratic point of view, I think that the election worked relatively well. I think that all the countermeasures that we have put in place have helped for sure to deter and expose disinformation, and then to limit in a certain way disinformation, even if it's clear, I told before, that they were not free from disinformation. So let's start from there, because I think we should continue in that way. I refer to something that we have been doing with platforms to get better to detect and to analyze disinformation. But there are other strengths we are working on. For instance, I think that media literacy is key in this area. And for the first time, we launched the Media Literacy Week in March for 5 days, with more than, I think it were 200 events all around Europe. We could more, probably yes, but we are supporting with some funds also qualitative journalism, because we recognize that the media, the journalists, quality journalists, investigative journalists have a key role in this area. So you ask about solution. I think there is not one magic solution. I think that we should continue to work hard on these 4 or 5 pillars that we have identified, and that we all have a responsibility. Social media, EU institution, national institution. I forgot to mention also that we have established for the first time a European network that brings together national networks, national authorities dealing with so the Electoral Commission, data privacy and cybersecurity experts from the national level. If I can say only one thing more, because I think this is an interesting debate, and I would like really to bring my experience on a different but linked file, that is the illegal terrorist content on the internet. Because the issue with this information is that we don't want to go to censorship. I mean, what we should work on, and what we should try to do altogether better, is to increase transparency. I mean, people need to know from where the information comes. And then when the information could be hate speech or could be other kind is a crime, then I think we have already all the remedies to fight that. But for sure we don't want to impose any kind of censorship or to impact on the freedom of speech. Yeah. Even because, and I really finish, it's extremely difficult to define, to qualify what is illegal in terms of disinformation. While, for instance, the illegal terrorist content, we have also a legal EU framework that can help us to qualify a piece of content as illegal. It's not the same here. So I think this is also an important angle that we should discuss.
Okay. Max, I'll get to you soon. Some remarks from the audience. Please say who you are.
Yes. My name is Alex Blom. I'm from the Internet Society. The problem may be difficult, but it seems that the solution is staring us in the face. First, we had a perfect system with local media checking local news and thus being a control on what came out in society. And then Google came along and put all these local media out of business. And now it's complaining that it cannot solve the problems that the local media used to solve. And the lady from the European Union said we need fiscal measures. And again, I can redirect that, the Council of Europe, I can redirect that suggestion to the gentleman of Google. To quote a famous Dutch countryman, pay your taxes, and we will have more than enough money to take care of the local media and resurrect them. And if you don't believe me, check on Google and type in Google tax loopholes, and you will find all the amounts we need to sanitize the media landscape. Thank you.
Okay, a couple of more remarks here.
Hi, I'm Aslak. I'm from Denmark. I work with news literacy programs, both for schools and for news media companies. I think we are looking in the complete wrong directions here, because what we need to face, and the truth is hard, is that there is a demand for fake news, for misinformation. And as long as there will be a demand for this, and we see that in the United States just the other day when Trump did his speech, there will be suppliers. So my suggestion is that we send a message that for every coin used on technical solutions, platform solutions, you should use 1 coin for news literacy programs.
It's a clear suggestion.
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm with Radio Free Europe. Is that a solution or suggestion? It's more of a closed question. Regarding the solutions that you all just mentioned, I'm just curious, do you really believe that they would work when there is no political will on a country level? All of the actions by journalists or journalists' union when the governments are consciously trying to sabotage all of that.
Thank you. And you?
My comment was more about the funding. It was mentioned during the discussion. There's clearly money available for that, but indeed I think the problem is more how to make it trickle to journalists without problems of independence. So I was wondering if it was considered to have a sort of clearinghouse mechanism that could somehow cut the ties between the source of funding and the receiver of this funding to make sure that this can be accessible.
And the fifth one, and then we'll go to the panel, starting with Max.
Thank you. I wanted just to share an idea that I had. Maybe I'm just dreaming, but I think that journalists, as already been said, should do the fact-checking and not people, because not everyone has the time to check every news. And what about creating a new platform with a new category of journalists that indeed are doing the fact-check? And if you are a journalist, you can apply and someone will check on your article. And if you are indeed a journalist that do the fact-check, you are in this category, and as long as you are in this category, every time you post an article on internet, it will be like with an icon, like a certified article, and as long as you are in this category, you can have like privileges such as, I don't know, for example, tax privileges. And of course, if you make mistakes, like if you do like 3 articles without fact check, you will be like kicked out from the category. So it was just an idea.
And who will decide on that?
A commission of experts, I think.
Commission of experts. Okay, so Max, there's a lot of ideas about money and advertisement in relation to Google. How do you react? What is it? What do you think? What do you make of it? The suggestions that were made.
Yeah, thanks. I took a good bunch of notes. And first of all, I wanted to start with Giacomo. I'd love to learn more about that BBC site. That sounds like a really useful thing to bring transparency and to allow follow-up, etc. Didn't know about that. The checks and balances for takedowns that you implied is certainly something that I think it has the potential to scale, to work on on the millions of pieces and incidents scale that we're talking about. there is an old saying that user-generated content needs user-generated governance, and I think that's true certainly on the first instance, right? You first should try to solve things in the neighborhood between the people directly. If that's not working, you apply the community rules. If still one party is not satisfied, you go to the higher national or international authorities. That's the normal way of escalation, but I think you can tackle a lot of incidents on that direct person-to-person, user-to-user piece. Then I got to admit, when you came more into the, look how good our best practices are and apply them to the internet, it sounded a bit to me like, oh my God, someone is wrong on the internet. It's a different medium, it's a different environment, and we have to accept that. And there's always, as you pointed out, this difficult balance between freedom of expression and what we consider good content and fact-check content. That's why I think they're trying to, in the first instance, make sure that the facts are straight. Because everything else, when it comes to, oh, this is a lie, I don't believe this, is it art, is it humor, is it comedy? I mean, you're getting in such difficult environments that I simply
Max,
say they're starting
just sorry
with the
to
easy
interrupt
ones.
you, but I think that the question that was posed to you was, is it all right that Google makes decisions on what is right or wrong? And what is your comment? Because I think that is a very problematic. I mean, I don't think you have an answer, and I don't have.
Yeah, actually, I was going to get to that because I think, it's kind of, Google finds itself many times in a catch-21 situation where it's like either you act and you take content down and then, you're creating a more safe environment, you're acting responsibly. But then on the other hand, people will say, oh, you're taking down too much content. How could you take down this particular one? We're talking about millions of pieces. How could you take down this one? That was a mistake. So I just think it's a balance question, and it's a question of whether the narrative is you want Google to play a strong role and put its norms and the norms that the company stands for out there in obviously deliberation with the public, but that's a strong Google, or do you want a Google that's more predictable and unbiased in either direction and just gives you a representation of what people want? It's not that this information, the spam, the weaponized information comes from us directly.
So I
wanted to punt the point to say this is a challenge for all of us. It's a societal challenge and it's a governance challenge. It's not something that you can just simply put over to one colleague. I did want to point out that there is a really interesting movement currently happening with the contract for the web that the Web Foundation is putting out, that is basically, if you want, a societal contract for the web that says governments should, companies should, and very importantly, users should, because as was pointed out in the comments as well, it's a lot about media literacy and making those decisions at the end of the system. There was an old saying that at the internet, intelligence sits at the end, at the node. And I think that should continue. The more intelligence we put into the system, the more systemic mistakes we also make. If we strengthen the endpoint and we create the engagement that you can create through the internet, if you have users participate, that's actually a very positive thing to do. Also on your point regarding I don't even know what the red dot means that says it's verified or not. I haven't seen that. But Wikimedia in Germany has actually put out two versions. They have the kind of Wild West Wikipedia that we all know, where everybody can edit, and then they have a verified version where, if you don't trust yourself to do that, you can outsource that to the community, and then you see older versions of the article that the community has looked at and has approved. So I think somewhere in that sphere is an interesting solution where you crowdsource and you work together. I also liked your point about the information ecosystem being as important as our food ecosystem, and I'm actually surprised how little the idea of brain food has been brought up, because this is really what we feed our brains. And for food, we clearly want nutrition information. We want all kinds of information about how it was produced, etc. So I think all of that can be applied and is an interesting and useful piece. To Antoine from the Internet Society, thanks very much for your comments. I do think that you equate Google with the Internet. Google hasn't brought down the local news industry. Google is a tool that gives access to information, and that does that without an intention of killing any industries or doing anything. With regards to tax, I also have to say that, I cannot not hear it anymore, because I think most of us, as private people, engage tax consultants who help us pay as little tax as we have to. And that's exactly what we are doing. So I'm very sorry. I do think that it's a very important issue. Google actually does engage in the OECD conversations about closing tax loops, but you cannot expect anybody to pay more tax than you have to, and that's not, illegal.
Can I make
That's what we have to do.
positive suggestion? Google has been fined by the European Commission a few times over the last years, no? How much money was that?
I think it was several
billions, if I
dollars.
remember well. So why don't we put that into local journalism, that money? Because it's a fine, it came in. Why don't we put, is that an idea, Silvio? Because people here are saying they are convinced that the market model, that is what I hear people say, there's two problems. The market model doesn't function. That is what Giacomo also saying. That is what Max is saying. So we have more or less, we agree on that. Maybe you don't, I don't know. And the second remark is, okay, what can we do as long as politicians, and it's not just about Russia, it is also about information destabilization and manipulation that is happening in Western European countries on maybe sometimes themes that are spiraled out of control. Vitaly was saying, in Ukraine, populism, etc. If there is no political will, then what do you do? So what I'm trying to see is where's the role for the politicians to take up? As a free press advocate, I believe that governments should be reluctant to interfere in the media sphere. But it's clear that this is a problem that is asking for political solutions also. Whether it's tax, whether it's funding, whether it's public and commercial, whether it's regulation. What is the role for politicians? And then I go for a second round of questions. Yeah. Is it too big a thing to chunk off, Silvio? I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. No. Sorry.
No, an easy answer is that I will pass your suggestion to the new president of the Commission when we will know who will be. No, I think today, your remark is absolutely legitimate. I think today, for instance, there is a debate among EU leaders in the European Council on this issue. I don't get, to be honest, 100% when you say that there is not political support, in the sense that, of course, I look at this problem from probably a different perspective. Of course, we know that there are governments around Europe of a different nature, but I will say that, and it's not just to say that we were good, but I would say that from many different instances we have seen a quite important commitment from national authorities on many different things, from the rapid alert system. Of course, you have countries that are much more committed and countries that maybe are less committed. But I would say that because government pass, so I think that we should look at this problem in a more structured way. But I repeat, it's not about censorship here. I'm not really interested to enter in this debate on censorship, because it's extremely difficult, And I think that people have still the right to say what they think about everything, up to a moment where this becomes illegal, up to a moment when this can harm other people. So I think that what we want to do is indeed to make all this ecosystem much more transparent. This is what probably was missing in previous years. The fact that, for instance, for political advertising, were absolutely not clear who was paying for this political advertising, who was entitled to put political advertising. In a certain way, you know that in all member states, at a different degree, of course, it's not the same legislation, but all countries have legislation to regulate electoral campaign. I mean, normally, if there is a political advertising on the radio, before you are entitled to listen to that advertisement, that politician speaking, there is someone saying to you, this has been paid by X, Y, etc., etc. So in all countries there is this kind of regulation. What was missing is that the internet has grown alone in a certain way, and I think that we should mirror what does exist for other communication means in the internet. The paid political advertising was a first step in that direction, I think.
Thanks. We'll go for more questions. You were raising your hand since a while.
Right. Thanks. Well, I think one of the solutions could be like gamifying or monetizing fact-checking. And I think you were talking about this Facebook red spot. So you'd really need to have a direct link to debunking information, so that it would be transparent. People could go and check for themselves, and they could sort of vote on it as well, whether it's like true or not, and it would like change over time as well. And I think another thing would be really important would be to make slow journalism worth it. I think that's a real key. I think a lot of people are totally fed up with clickbait news, and I think it's actually really nice to read a journalist article of 30 to 50 pages about one issue that actually dwells really deep into the issue, and you learn a lot. It's like reading a novel on reality. I think there are ways to do it. There's one long play. It's a news service in Finland. It's quite small time, but I think it's gaining traction, and I think there could be like lots of market for that.
Thank you. We had another question from the gentleman here.
Yes, well, maybe it's a question to Google, whom I not consider the boogeyman, but actually our friend, because they help us out in many ways. And it's about the attention economy and the business model. At what point would you consider yourself a news publisher and take the responsibility that news publishers have always done as gatekeepers to information? By an example, news publishers, they have op-eds, they have an editorial every day stating that if you have news from our news outlet, maybe we're right-winged and maybe we are very European biased or something like that, so that you as a user know what the source of information is. I don't see Google taking the same responsibility as sort of a news provider.
Yeah, I kind of sympathize with Max because he seems to be singled out now here, but you were raising your hand anyhow, so sorry.
Yeah, that's part of the job when you sit here for the big company. But maybe let me start with this one. It's something that we debate continuously. That is not an easy decision to make. Not only for whether we want to, but whether it's actually good for the ecosystem if Google also starts to provide news themselves, because then you would really get into yet another level of competition. We have started to produce content on YouTube, which I see as a step in that direction to also become a content provider ourselves. But when it comes to news so far, I think that the Google News portal, which is by itself controversial enough, is the intermediate step, I would say. And there, due to exactly the requests that we're hearing, we're starting to have what comes, it's a spectrum. It's always a spectrum, and it comes closer to providing curated content. And then once you start to curate content, and you don't just rely on what the interest by people tell you, then you're starting to have that responsibility. And I don't know, I don't work in that particular function, but I do know that we're continuously debating that. I did want to come back to the proposal for a kind of self-organized good quality journalism portal that is developing. I know that there is one actually that does exactly that, sign up journalists for online reporting on a trust basis with applications. I can't remember the name though. If you want to follow up, I'm happy to look it up. What I do know is a project that I find almost more interesting because it serves a second function, that is Global Voices. It started out of the Berkman Center in Harvard, but it's an independent organization now for many years. And what they do is they translate content. They not only have trusted bloggers or citizen journalists or however you want to call them, they also translate from Iranian into English and from English into local languages. And I think that is another function if you don't want to rely on AI translations, which I don't think is the solution. That's a very promising path to take because you also develop the human trust and networks of people that can work together. When Silvio made his comments, one incident, just to give you a glimpse into, put yourself into the shoes of Google and how we're thinking about stuff and how we're debating it. When it comes to terrorist content on YouTube, clearly, if it's illegal content, we have to take it down. However, are we not also losing one of the most interesting and insightful data source to understand what is going on there by taking down the content? So we haven't been asked to do this, but we're thinking about, is there not incredible value for researchers in that data? Now, of course, you need a system where researchers apply and so on and so forth, but there will always be an element of trust, because once you give them access to the video, they can, even if it's not downloadable, they can just hold up their phone and take a video of it, and then it's out again. So I think these are really, really difficult questions, and it's not a black and white answer. And as I've started my comments today, I think we are in this together. And it's a matter of debating and understanding what works. And yes, there are mistakes made along the way. It's not move fast and break things. That's that was an early internet meme of putting things out. I think in the age of AI and the heated debate that we have right now, it's a cautious, more conservative environment. And I hope we don't, quite frankly, end up where you ended up, which is a very, very tight environment where, yes, we have quality, but I'm sure you can also share a good round of stories of how slow and bureaucratic the system has become. So I think, we need to find each other somewhere in the middle and hopefully keep the good of both sides.
Okay, thanks for that. Before we go to our closing report, I wanted to give the floor to Vitaly and Giacomo and Malgorzata, and saying, because the discussion is a little bit spiraling between the platforms and the role of the European Union. Malgorzata, we have Article 7 procedures around a couple of nation states that are members of the European Union, and the lack of press freedom is one of the problems. So, should the European Union, in your perspective, do more? Giacomo, actually what some of the people who are not from, let's say, our generation of publishers and journalism from the public media system are saying we need new models. We need new journalism models. Isn't the publishing world, the print journalism and the broadcasting world, are we not getting out of date? And Vitaly, from a perspective of development, how can we develop new ideas? Because it seems that, you know, we're staring in the abyss, but we're not really working towards new models. Margosata.
Well, certainly European Union should do more, but states also, European states should engage more in this respect. Saying that, while I believe it's primarily up to states to address these pressing issues, there is a role for other stakeholders, for media, for platforms, for civil society, to engage in solution finding. I would like also to briefly refer to discussion about technical solutions, fact-checking, and role of media literacy. Actually, none of these solutions applied on its own will not work. It's not enough. Technical solutions can be useful, but actually there are some good studies that show that users, when faced with flagging on Facebook that given piece of information is fake, they will ignore it, or they will find that flagging is biased and true. So technical solutions is a part of a technical options are one of the solution, but if not met with developing media and information literacy, by also rebuilding trust in media, in online platforms, it can be done on a variety of measures we don't have time to explore it, will not be enough. So we have to consider at the same time variety of complementary measures.
Thank you. Giacomo.
It's complex. I think that the main issue that we need to have clear is that there is an industry, a media industry that exists, that has worked and has been heavily regulated for more than 100 years. Okay? I have the suspect that the platforms, they like to support, to engage individuals because they prefer not to discuss with media organizations directly, because they prefer to have hundreds of journalists that individually work and they try to do the fact-checking at home, etc., instead of working with media organization, traditional media organization. This is fundamentally wrong because this continues to undermine the system. Why you were mentioning the Czech Republic? Why in the Czech Republic or before in Hungary or in Turkey there has been a caption of traditional media by new actors that are near to the government of the country? It comes because the family in Turkey that were for ages making the business out of producing newspapers or producing news channels, at a certain point they get without advertising anymore. So their empires they were proud to be independent and to be stronger watchdog to the governments. Once that they are not making any more money and a tycoon near to the power of the country arrives and make you a big offer on the table, they sell. This is what is happening because we have weakened the media industry. I think that we need to strengthen the media industry. Hundreds of journalists alone will never be able to reproduce the same thing.
But Giacomo, I had a pertinent question to you,
yes.
And we're closing off after more than an hour of discussion. Isn't the traditional publishing industry investing enough in finding new ways to regain trust? Because you're currently almost looking at, the people outside.
Yeah. I have a gift for you. This is the publication that we have just released. It's called 50 Ways to Make It Better.
I know this.
And it's not about sex, it's about journalism. and how to engage with the people in the country and the citizens. And I think that this is what we do every day for making this better. But the problem is that the conditions have to be fair. Just to answer to your question, Daphne Caruana Galizia blew up because she was a single journalist. And there was, unfortunately, in that country, the public service is so weak and so poor that they cannot afford to make investigative journalism. So when you leave a single individual person, it's very easy for a mafia, for a corrupt government, for whatever, to kill a single. Why, if you have a strong media industry, their interest is to be credible and to have a return on investment from the citizens. So I think that before to throw away what we have built in 100 years of history, would be good to see if it's possible to work together, but together as equal. The mechanism of Google that gives some money to the media industry, to the publishing industry, it's ridiculous.
Okay, your point is clear.
Because you decide to who you give the money.
The scale is different.
The scale is different, but the respect needs to be the same.
Yeah.
You said that the infrastructure of media is crucial. It's crucial for democracy. It's crucial for the future of our living standards.
Yeah, I think we all agree on that, actually. Vitaly, I ask you for a pertinent comment on where to go from here in terms of innovation, new ideas.
In today's world, one of the phenomena is that the tools of democracy are used by non-democratic countries. So democracy tools are used against democracy itself. And that is the key for non-democracies. On these sides, when we talk about the tech companies, I still believe that companies originated from democracies will act according to respect to human rights and democracy values. The key issue is building dialogue and this multi-stakeholder approach when we jump into dialogue between government, tech companies, and civil society. And European civilizations is built on recognition on human rights, and that's why, for example, when we talk about journalists, Council of Europe define journalists in a very broad term. So if you write something online, Council of Europe will defend you as a journalist, and it doesn't, and it means that it might be in some way manipulated by the actors who are hiding and are originated from non-democratic countries. So what is solutions? For sure, we should push for transparency of funding of media sources, and we should rely on self-regulations when within journalist community. If we see that the journalist standards are violated, journalist community should use the approach naming and shaming. Standards are must-have. And only encouraging people to follow the standards is one of the good solutions for journalism. Thank you.
Okay. We have to close it off here. I'm handing back to Michael. I will not make an attempt to wrap up, but you will.
Sure. So actually, so sorry first of all for being a little over time. I know we're cutting just into lunch, but what we need to do right now is just Marco is our session reporter, and he's going to come up and essentially give the wrap up by presenting to you the key messages which we'll be taking away from this session and which will feed into the larger Internet Governance Forum annual meeting, which will be held in Berlin in November. And it will also be very much kind of the summary from this meeting as well as potential policy recommendations. So Marco, can I give you the floor?
Thank you very much, and thank you to the speakers for this interesting discussion. As a participant, I was very interested by the rich discussion. As a rapporteur, it wasn't easy to summarize in just 3 or 4 points the main challenges and solutions that were proposed, but I'll try anyways. So during the discussion, there were a few challenges proposed. The first one was the challenge on the nature of disinformation, which was said to be a phenomenon that evolves quickly, both in quality and in nature. It's an evolving tactics, as it was said, and solutions included, for example, mentioned by the EU Commission, the four pillars strategy, the rapid alert system to tackle disinformation, the creation of a shared platform between the EU institutions and the government, as well as other cooperation mechanisms such as the voluntary guidelines between the EU Commissions and private technological companies, as well as the monitoring of the implementation. An important point that was also stressed by a couple of speakers was to have access or to get access to the big data and the data analytics of the platforms behind the phenomenon of disinformation, and the collaboration between private technological companies and platforms with independent researchers. A second challenge that was also mentioned was the interplay between populism and social media, and the use of social media for hate speech, which fit into the more general post-truth debate, the fact that for rational politics is not appealing anymore for voters, and the more practical challenges, as we saw in the Ukrainian case, such as the proxy media phenomenon, and solutions were mentioned in the direction of a more control of platforms in the case of blatant violations of user rights, control which is also balanced with the principles of transparency, in accordance, of course, with the existing human rights mechanisms. The second part of the discussion focused on a third challenge, which was how to respond to a business model in the digital economy that makes this information more profitable than actual factual-based information. And just to wrap up, three main solutions were listed. First of all, a big stress on the independency of the media as a benchmark, an invitation to rethink the relation not only between government and platforms, but most importantly between platforms and traditional media. This because it was said that fact-checking, it cannot be on the media alone, it cannot be on the tech platforms alone, but it should be on the interaction of the two. And second point was a stress on fact-based and quality and ethical journalism, which is said to be essential to fight disinformation. And the challenge here is that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And solutions has to be customized to the countries. The Council of Europe was mentioning that they're putting forth some targeted suggestions, for example, fiscal measures or fiscal solutions for specific countries in order to support the media outlets, the creation of support teams for specific types of media, and a call for more discussion about not only disinformation and elections, but how to identify illegal content, which is whose identification is pretty local. To close, all the speakers stressed the importance of media literacy and a big stress on transparency, not only on the relations between actors, but on the content regulation and content management aspect in order to have these cooperation mechanisms be compatible with the existing human rights framework. Anyways, the full session report will be available on the Digital Watch Observatory website later this afternoon.
So in general, does anyone kind of disagree with any of these key points? Does everyone accept these key points? I think that's the better question to ask.
So first of all, thank you. I think it was an incredibly difficult task. There was one element where I think I heard something that I disagree with. I think it was never said that the business model favored disinformation. I think you're saying when you're describing the problem under number 3 that the new business models favor disinformation. I don't think that's the case, and that wasn't said.
It wasn't said, perhaps it was implied, but would we want to strike that particular sentence from the key messages?
Someone in the audience has a remark about it. Yeah. I mean, but it wasn't said as such, right, in my memory.
I mean, this is Lisa from Ranking Digital Rights. I just wanted to raise my hand as someone that would keep it in the statement. So.
No, I don't know if it was already covered, but I think two key messages, if possible, I would like to see. One is that although the measure put in place worked relatively well, there was this information, and we should not accept this as a new normal. It's important, this. And the second key message, of course, the European elections were extremely visible. I mean, we were debating on this since a long. But there are elections in Europe every week, starting with the national Greek election, I think, on the 7th of July. Ukraine. Yeah. So I think that we should keep up all together, collectively, this momentum, also the companies, and not to let's say, to give up because we have done already our job. Not at all.
I didn't feel at all that that was anyone's intention at the panel. Please, thank you all for being here. Michael, actually, we're going to dinner, I think. Lunch, I mean. Not a dot.
We're really, actually, we still haven't actually clarified this point about the key messages. This is probably one of the really important one. How would we, so I'm going to propose then that, could you potentially reword that, Marco, so that instead of it saying that it's specifically about the business model is encouraging disinformation, just to say that there could potentially be a relationship between business models and disinformation. Is that more acceptable? I don't know if it works that way. Or you could address the fact that there is a demand for disinformation, and so there is also a supply of disinformation, which was addressed in the session. Before we continue, we're already 15 minutes over, so thank you.
I think we cannot reach agreement on this point, and so we should list it as something that is disagreed upon.
Oh yes, I think that's actually something that we can do.
Sorry, that's the normal way of doing things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
we
that's also a
reflect the discussion as it was had. Giacomo, final comment, and then we stop the microphone.
It's not a comment. It's an information to Max, to my friend Max. Do you know where is the largest library of books at the index? Pornos, books, and books about devil things. The largest collection is in the Biblioteca Vaticana in Rome. It's called Infernetto. So about the fact that if you take down the terrorist contents, there is a solution. You create your own Infernetto, and it's accessible by permission of the cardinal. You can find something else instead of the cardinal, and you can give access to researchers, studiers, etc. So this is not the main problem. There are solutions all over the history.
Thank you for that. And with that all said, thank you for being here and your patience for a rich discussion, very complex issues that we need to keep on debating. Thank you.
And just very quickly as well, thank you to all of our speakers. We forgot to do that. To Urio and the organizing team for getting this together. To Raina and the Secretariat for all their work. Our remote moderator, even though I don't think there was anybody in the remote room. And also to our live captioner. Thank you very much.